That was Sunrise on the main stage. Give it up for Sunrise, everybody. Sunrise. Hey, Alec Burlikoff, Vice President of Sales, Insys Therapeutics. Hey, I love what you did up there. Really great work. Listen. I want you to work for me. Do you ever do sales? You know, it doesn't matter. You know how to do sales. I'm sold on you.
Honey, I'm a dancer. I don't know anything about pharmaceuticals. I don't sell pills.
You're not selling pills. You're selling life. This place I work at makes this product. It's a game changer. Stops pain like that. I mean, come on. Nobody wants to be in pain. No one wants to see anyone in pain. A quick pricked under the tongue, and that. And 5 minutes later, you're back at it, baby. What do you say? Come on, Sunrise, come with me. I know you'd be great. We need you. Our patients need you.
And just like that, Sunrise Lee was the Central Florida sales director for Insys Therapeutics. Lee and Burlikoff were in charge of pushing Insys' marquee product, an opioid spray called Subsys. Subsys was a remarkably fast-acting form of fentanyl, a pain reliever 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. The FDA was mindful of its potency, and it was only approved for use in end-stage cancer patients with breakthrough cancer pain. But to Insys, what made Subsys most appealing was its profit margin, which, coupled with its exceptionally addictive properties, well, let's just hear it from one of their consultants.
This line represents money, and money is going up. Thank you. That'll be $5 million.
The big brains at Insys hit gold, and the nerds at the FDA were not going to stop them. Company sales reps took to the Sun Belt, hurtling towards pain clinics like dollar bills tossed at the bada bing. It was Alec Burlikoff and Sunrise Lee who pushed those reps to pressure doctors to prescribe as much Subsys as possible. Lee's favorite sales motivation tool was a strongly worded email. Team, we must hit our goal of 1 prescription per day. Remember the key points on educating these doctors. Pain is pain. 5-minute, fast-acting onset. Find the effective dose. 100 micrograms, 200 micrograms of Subsys do not work. Don't start lower than 400 micrograms, or we'd be better off having them prescribe our competitors. If your go-to doctor is not writing scripts, keep on them. Get their numbers up. If they're not writing, they do not get invites for the paid speaking times. Immediate negative consequences for reps ignoring these directives. Sunrise. Insys sales rep Ray Furchak read through that email on his BlackBerry and leaned into the driver's seat of his sedan. He didn't have much experience in pharmaceuticals, let alone selling, but that was pretty common among Insys reps. But still, this didn't feel like normal sales techniques. Opiates were dangerous. Everybody knew that at this point. So why was Lee telling reps to have doctors write scripts at such high doses? And when he pulled into the pain clinics in his territory, there was a line of people snaked around the crumbling sidewalk, and they didn't look like terminal cancer patients to him. And then she said consequences for reps if their docs didn't write scripts for stronger doses? And the docs being threatened? It felt sketchy at best, criminal at worst. But what was he going to do with the smoking gun? So he Googled, what to do when you think your company is doing fraud.
Hi, is this the Department of Justice? Yeah, I'd like to report a money laundering and fraud scheme involving lonely physicians, former strippers, copious amounts of off-label fentanyl use, and worst of all, a deeply cringy corporate promotional music video. Oof. Yeah, sure, I'll hold.
According to Furchak's whistleblower lawsuit against Insys and its CEO John Kapoor, the company was engaged in a massive kickback scheme. They bribed doctors to prescribe Subsys and pay them a bounty through a thinly veiled speakers program. They targeted desperate doctors, many with money problems, and pressured inexperienced sales reps to push the doctors to prescribe drugs off-label. That means prescribing it to patients who did not have breakthrough cancer pain. Reps, who were often even more desperate than the doctors, were fired if they didn't meet their quotas. The lawsuit was filed in early 2012, just a few months after Subsys hit the market. But despite the warning, the Justice Department declined to support him, and Furchak was forced to drop the suit and quit the company. It would take several years before accusations of wrongdoing would get any media coverage. In that time, 7,000 deaths would be reported by the FDA among people taking Subsys. It was also enough time for the Insys CEO, John Kapoor, to be featured on the cover of Forbes. He had a pharmacy school named after him, and he became a billionaire off the company's IPO, which just so happened to be the top performing IPO of 2013. And then, in 2016, Alec Burlikoff, still a top sales manager at Insys, got a call from the Massachusetts district attorney. The state was building a racketeering case against his boss. Would he be willing to flip? This is the Corporate Gossip Podcast. Ain't no party like an Insys party.
Hey, this is producer Mike. If you want to binge all of season 4 right now and not have to wait for weekly drops, head over to our brand new Patreon, patreon.com/corporate gossip. All audio and video are up there right now for the entire season. Plus, not only can you binge the entire season, there'll be discussions with Adam and Becca about each episode. So head over to patreon.com/corporate gossip and sign up now. All right, let's get into the show.
Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Gossip Podcast. I'm your host, CPA scorned Becca Platsky. I'm here with my brother and my co-host,
Data analytics playboy, Adam Platsky.
And producer Mike.
Producer of all producers.
Today we're talking about Insys Therapeutics. You might not have heard of this company, but the story is truly insane. This is kind of another episode in the opioid suite, I guess, that we've started with McKinsey and now we're doing Insys. Maybe we'll do Purdue at some point as well. This Insys Therapeutics was an especially dirty player in the depraved world of opioid sales. And this podcast episode in particular is going to pull from a few sources. We start with an original 2018 New York Times article called Pain Hustlers. Then the book by the same reporter, also called Pain Hustlers, although you just said it was initially published under a different name.
The hard sell.
But Evan Hughes wrote this book based on his reporting. It's pretty incredible. And then the reason it was renamed is because a Netflix documentary, a Netflix movie came out called Pain Hustlers, I think this year. You didn't watch it because apparently it got terrible ratings on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I wouldn't subject myself to that.
But I actually thought it was rather good. And I'll say, when I finished the movie, I actually would agree with a lot of those reviewers that I thought it was terrible. But the reason I thought it was terrible is because I thought it was so outlandish. I was like, okay, you know, this pharmaceutical sales rep is going to a strip club and that's where he's picking up his future sales reps. Like, that just seems ridiculous. There was so much depravity. There was so much silliness. There was so much blatant fraud that I thought this is just too outlandish. But that was all accurate. And so all the things that I thought it was stupid for them to include in a script because it didn't seem plausible was actually what happened. So once I read the book and once I did the research, I had a better appreciation. So let's dive into it. We will start with the first piece of corporate gossip, which is John Kapoor pulls a page out of the Elizabeth Holmes playbook. Every startup needs a sob story. The similarities between the CEO of Insys and Elizabeth Holmes are pretty tremendous.
Also, the similarities between these guys is it looks like John Hamm with a beard and Al Franken.
Yes.
Yeah, it really
It
is.
looks like this has been cast.
They certainly did him some favors in casting Andy Garcia as John Kapoor in Pain Hustlers, but here he is with his fictionalized version. John Kapoor, who founds Insys Therapeutics, is born in Punjab in India in the early 1940s. We don't know the exact date, but he comes from a family of modest means. Most of his childhood is not documented very well, and it's not really talked about. But he moves to Mumbai to get his formal education at the Institute of Chemical Technology. He gets a degree in pharmacy, and then he moves to the US, where he goes to the University of Buffalo, and he gets a doctorate in medicinal chemistry in 1972. The pharmacy school at University of Buffalo would end up being called the Edith and John Kapoor Pharmacy School because they donated, I think, what was the biggest gift at the time of like $250 million to name the building after him. Mm-hmm. Eventually, they would revoke the name.
But keep the cash.
He marries his wife in 1974. She's a cheerleader. When he's at University of Buffalo, she's at Niagara Community College, and they're married. I don't think they have any kids. I couldn't find any information about children that he might have, but she ends up having breast cancer and eventually dies in 2005. Now, this experience for John, his wife dying at home of breast cancer at only 54 years old, is an incredibly traumatic experience for her. He talks about how much pain she's in. He tells this story of this experience to investors and to customers. Seeing his wife in pain at the end of her life drove him to create this new drug that could address, now this is important, breakthrough cancer pain. So when you're in so much pain and you're at the end of your life, this is a drug to solve for specifically that. So his idea ends up becoming Subsys. Subsys basically takes fentanyl, which is a narcotic 80 times more potent than morphine, and puts it into a spray. So before this, you would generally take fentanyl as a patch or as a lollipop. And this would, the fentanyl would get into your system in 45 minutes or so. So you'd start feeling the effects of the narcotics in about 45 minutes. Subsys, you spray it underneath your tongue and it hits your system almost instantaneously in up to 5 minutes. The pharmaceutical lingo, which I'm only going to use here, but I won't use it again, is a TIRF, a transmucosal immediate release fentanyl. And you can see a fast-acting narcotic would be really appealing to people, especially those with breakthrough cancer pain who maybe are in their last weeks of life. Like spending 45 minutes in pain is a big deal. Yeah. And so getting to 5 minutes to pain relief is a big deal. But it's also appealing to people who didn't have breakthrough cancer pain. And you can see how this drug in the hands of people who didn't need it would be very dangerous. It wasn't necessarily publicized that it would be so dangerous. In fact, the studies at the time said, hey, less than 1% of the people that use Subsys get addicted. But if you look at the population of the studies that they were running, they were done in end stage terminal cancer patients.
Right, so they died before they had a chance to be addicted.
Exactly. Let's talk business. So there's a 60-minute special that's on Paramount Plus that I watched back in 2020. And they interview a federal investigator named Greg Tromolio. And he says that a lot of these companies, they know that selling these drugs to people who don't have breakthrough cancer pain, which is what Insys ultimately did, is breaking the law. But profits are so high and money is rolling in at such a accelerated rate that by the time the FDA catches up to them and slaps them with a couple of $100 million in fines, who cares? You know, they'll act upset about it, but they'll still come out on top. And we've seen this again and again when we've done the calculations to see that, you know, these companies, yeah, they're hit with a $250 million fine, but they made $1 billion.
Yeah, it's cost of doing business.
And you'll see, you know, there's a lot of proof for them knowing that what they did is illegal. There's one document I'll discuss in particular that was printed off on a regular basis and then eaten by the secretaries. So they would print off this report for the CEO. He would look at it. Then the secretary would eat it.
If that and then the government investigators would go through the shitter and piece it back together.
Incest. We can deliver fentanyl, but none of us have heard of a paper shredder. Matches. No thanks, pal. That's dangerous. Eat the paper.
It does seem like that would be like the least effective way to destroy documents.
Yeah, seriously.
We know that this drug is about to make Kapoor a very rich man. At one point, he's worth like $2.6 billion. And no shocker, is on the cover of Forbes the year after Elizabeth Holmes is on the cover of Forbes. So how did he get here? Now, this is the only older picture of Kapoor that I could find. In Kapoor's mid-30s, after he graduates from Buffalo, he gets a job at this company called Lifomed. Lifomed is hemorrhaging money at the time. And Kapoor sees this opportunity to basically get a group of investors together to do a leverage buyout of this firm. And he takes $50,000 of his own money and takes control of this medicine company. And the first thing that you notice about Kapoor in reading his biography is that he's got a knack for marketing. So he takes these pretty lame medical products that Lifomed is creating and developing creative ways to sell them to previously uninterested hospitals and doctor's office. But he's also kind of a snake. So here's one story. So Lifomed is a de facto monopoly on an antibiotic that became the go-to treatment for a deadly pneumonia common in AIDS patients. The company Martin Shkreli'd that shit and quadrupled the price. Protesters lay down en masse in front of its Chicago headquarters for a die-in. But business is business. And under Kapoor's leadership, the company's revenue grew 25 times. But of course, not without scandal, right? So in 1987, the FDA flags this company, Lifomed, for serious violations. And 1 year later, drugs are seized from its facilities. From a Forbes article, it says Lifomed's drugs were not produced in a sterile environment. There was broken glass in what was supposed to be a sterile room. In 1990, a congressional subcommittee called Lifomed's manufacturing problems legendary. So what have we learned about John Kapoor so far? He's really creative when it comes to marketing, and he's not so strict when it comes to developing and administering drugs in a way that's not going to harm the public.
Right.
Additionally, it came out that the company was submitting false or misleading information on new product approvals. That's also going to be a theme going forward. But despite all this, Kapoor ends up selling a stake in 1989, 9 years after his initial $50,000 investment, and he makes $130 million. And so he's got $130 million burning a hole in his pocket, and he starts investing in other pharmaceutical companies with the help of a 20-something portfolio analyst named Mike Babbage.
How did they... Babic.
I heard Babbage in the documentary. That's what they were saying, or in the 60 Minutes thing. Do you know how they met?
Yeah, so Babbage was working at a smaller investment fund, which was like kind of a dead end job. And one of Babbage's clients was like, you got to go see this guy Kapoor, who's running this EJ Financials outside of Chicago in a small suburb. And he went out there and kind of talked to Kapoor very briefly, and then became like essentially a portfolio manager for Kapoor. And they just started working closer and closer together. But yeah, Babbage was at this dead-end job, found this other opportunity, and Kapoor sunk his teeth into him. I mean,
Kapoor is, I think, probably in his 50s at this point, and Babbage is in his 20s. They have very much a father-son relationship, it seems. Kapoor paid for Babbage's MBA at Northwestern, and eventually Kapoor makes Babbage the CEO of Insys. Babbage is going to end up being a pretty significant character in the story going forward. Do you want to get us where are we in time?
Oh yeah. So
let's move to the 2000s.
To the 2000s. So who's on the charts in 2000s?
It's probably Hold Me Now. I'm 6 feet from the edge and I'm thinking.
Yeah, it is Creed. Yeah. And you just got your new Envy from the Verizon store, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, it was a good year. In the year 2000, let's meet up now with Kapoor. So his pockets are bulging. But at the same time, he's watching his wife suffer in her final years. This is a quote from that time. He says, "I can tell you pain is such a misunderstood thing for cancer patients. Nobody understands pain. They think pain is just pain. My wife went through it. In her final days, family gathered in the Kapoor house and could hear her wailing from the other room." And what's interesting here is that's kind of the story that he sticks with in terms of his inspiration to buy Subsys. But Babbage remembers it differently. In Babbage's narrative, the clear business potential of the product figures more heavily than Editha's Kapoor's health history. Everything stemmed from Kapoor's observation that spray delivery was not only scientifically promising, but remunerative. According to Babbage, Kapoor observed that sublingual sprays could be priced much higher than pills and compete with generics. He couldn't see why more sprays weren't being developed. So he's basically saying, like, you know, yeah, this product could help me, my wife, but more importantly, it's extremely profitable, or rather just as importantly. So Subsys is born, and it's basically just a reformulation of an existing drug. The main reformulation being that it was a spray rather than a pill or a patch. I mean, the fact that he's kind of trying to spin it as this way to address the pain that his wife suffered in his final years, and then to ultimately have been responsible for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of overdose deaths, is pretty cosmically fucked. You ready to move to corporate gossip number 2? All right. Corporate gossip number 2 is tuck it in your waistband, John Kapoor. The FDA just approved your drug. You came up with that one. I thought that was funny.
You liked that one. Okay.
Yeah. the picture that I'm showing right now is actually the last box of Subsys delivered to somebody who ultimately overdosed from the drug. There's probably at least 15 in there.
I was going to say 50. I mean, it looks like a shoebox.
I think it's smaller than, because look at how small the thing is. I think it's about the size of a tissue box.
Maybe a donut box.
Filled with Subsys.
Could be donuts.
I think it's important to set the stage before we get into how Insys ultimately marketed and developed a business around Subsys. We just need to cover how pharmaceutical companies make money in the first place. So first, they research an existing need. This could be covert. This could be COVID. This could be Alzheimer's, maybe gout.
Cough, cough. Somebody in this room.
Then we develop the drug. So drug startups spend hundreds of millions of dollars to research and develop these products in the hopes that one day it'll work. Then we have clinical trials and FDA approval. Now, once the drug company can see that it's working, they start the approval process. This can take years, but once this is done, then you're going to start to see ROI. Step 4 is bringing the product to market. Now, this is interesting. These startup pharmaceutical companies, they'll often develop a drug and get approval with no intention of ever bringing the drug to market. But what they want instead is one of these big players to buy them. So they put in all this investment and they kind of need to see a return. So when they get bought, that's when they're able to kind of cash out. It's mutually beneficial. The startup gets rich and the larger companies like Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca don't have to spend that money on R&D, but they still reap the benefits of like a 20-year exclusivity before the drug patent runs out. So that's just a little background. So let's get back to Kapoor. So here he is in the lab. I'm obsessed with these carefully curated lab photo ops, like this, and then again like Elizabeth Holmes. Like, look at me, I'm standing near some Bunsen burners. Science.
It's like when I see a cooking show and the owner is doing the cooking, but they haven't cooked there in probably 20 years. And the real cook's behind him, like, he has no idea. He's the guy just showed up yesterday.
I come here every morning, 5 a.m., and I start with the remoulade.
I crack 400 eggs. The guy in the background. You cut 400 eggs.
He kind of looks like Sheena Shea when she shows up at Sir and starts polishing the glassware with a tea kettle. You think he's polishing those Bunsen burners?
No, yeah.
Okay, so now it's 2007. Creed, I think, is
6 feet under.
Yeah.
Yeah, Creed's dead.
It's also Sexy Back.
It's time of Sexy Back?
Timbaland is
bringing sexy back.
I'm bringing fentanyl back.
Oh!
At this point, we're in the depths of a full-on opioid epidemic, mostly thanks to Purdue Pharma and McKinsey. OxyContin had laid havoc across the country. In 2007 alone, there was almost 28,000 drug overdoses, and this is more than 5 times what it had been in 1990.
I've got a great fact here, too. People who abuse opioids have direct health costs more than 8 times of those non-abusers.
Yeah. So it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to abuse opioids, like across the spectrum. And I think it's important to remember that fentanyl, which is the main ingredient in Subsys, is 100 times more powerful than morphine. And oxycodone is 1.5 times more powerful than morphine. So most people have had oxycodone if they, like, we talked about this in prior episodes, like if you got your wisdom teeth taken out or something, and it'll knock you out.
Like an ingrown toenail.
Yeah. Oxycodone will knock you out, but imagine 100 times more powerful than that is coming to market in the midst of an opioid crisis, and it's relatively new to people who are not doctors. Nonetheless, any new opioid alternative by the time it's 2007 were obviously treated fairly seriously by the FDA, given the risks that we knew already of a much less powerful drug, which is OxyContin and oxycodone. But ultimately, Kapoor and his whiz kid Babbage get Subsys approved around 2012. By the way, Kapoor and Babbage are basically living together at this time in Phoenix because Babbage had given his whole career up to go work for him.
Splitting time at times from Northwestern and his family back in Chicago. So Kapoor's like, hey, why don't you just shack up with me for a little bit and we'll work on the Subsys thing together. But I mean, yeah, look at
He
Babbitt.
looks like
You said
such
he's
a
a rube. He's a Midwest boy.
He's like, look at these. What are these called again?
He doesn't look like a bad bitch, I tell you that. He looks like he's a PE teacher, but he has to prove that he also teaches a class.
Yeah.
It's like he's a coach, but I'm also the science teacher. No, you're not. Shut up.
Yeah, this is another unnecessary lab portrait. These little, what are these, pipettes in the foreground, and then Michael Babbage in the background. Science rules!
Pattern shirt, pattern tie. That's like a big no-no.
Oh, I didn't even see that. Pattern shirt, pattern. I don't know enough about men's fashion. Are you sure that wasn't hot
Neither
in
does Michael
2012?
Babbage.
I don't think so.
Okay, so now the drug is approved. What's the next step? Take the drug to market. And for that, we need a marketing team. And it'll be led by this guy named Matt Napolitano, who was hired away from a competing pharmaceutical company. Now, marketing pharmaceuticals is not like super straightforward because the lines are blurred on who's the customer. Is the customer the patient? Not really. For most of these pharmaceutical companies, the customer is the guy with the prescription pad, is the doctor. The physician is the one who's making the decisions on what drug the patient takes. So here's a quote from Pain Hustlers. To the drug maker, the most important transaction, even though no money changes hands, is the prescription. For manufacturers, there's also almost nothing more valuable than knowing who is prescribing your product and who is prescribing the competition. And because these drugs are so powerful, these are controlled substances, right? So this would be like a Xanax, or what else is in this class? An Adderall. Like there are certain drugs that are controlled compared to
AKA bars.
Sure.
That's what we call them.
That's what we call them on the street.
That's what I heard people in high school call them.
So as opposed to another class of drugs like an antibiotic or an SSRI like a Lexapro or whatever, like these are not as controlled substances. But these drugs are incredibly powerful, and the marketing, there's a lot of rules around the marketing of these drugs. Countless fines had been given for violating these rules. But remember what we said at the top. It's the cost of doing business. These pharmaceutical companies at the time were okay flouting the rules and not being totally transparent about the side effects of some of these drugs. One of the most common and problematic violations is marketing for off-label purposes. So for example, marketing a drug for terminal cancer pain as good for back spasms. So that's what it means to be off-label. So anytime you're not prescribing these drugs very specifically for end-stage cancer pain. Now, the FDA isn't in the practice of like micromanaging doctors, and they believe in something called the practice of medicine, which means like they get that doctors are going to prescribe medicine to their patients in a way that will work for them. But this assumes that doctors are not being provided misleading information by drug reps or being groomed or bribed by drug reps, right? And that said, there are fairly clear regulations about how drug reps themselves can market or sell a controlled substance like fentanyl. You can't go in and say, here's this magic pill, it's going to solve all of your problems and it has no side effects. Like that's illegal. But there is a little bit of gray area, which companies like Insys certainly exploited. If you look at the actual material, this comes from an incredible website where I pulled a lot of the stuff from our McKinsey episode called Opioid Industry Docs. And this is a sales guide. It says keys to success when selling subsys. So this is something that a drug rep would get and they would read on their way to the doctor's office. One of the things that I find really interesting is that when you go what you should know, the essentials are the things that why you should prescribe subsys to your patients instead of some other pain medicine. One of the points here is that it's sugar-free and that sugar is a known risk to patients with metabolic syndrome and diabetes.
That's real bottom of the barrel.
Sugar-free, sorry, yeah, it'll make them completely addicted. It'll make them, they have a high chance of overdose, but at least they won't have a little spike in blood sugar. Like, what the? Here's another little note. I'll just show you, Adam, because I don't have it on the slide, but at the bottom of this literature that drug reps are reading, it says, no, always present subsys in a fair and balanced manner, providing the full indication and risks associated with subsys. The most serious adverse reactions associated with all opioids are respiratory depression, circulatory depression, hypotension, and shock. No mention of addiction. In fact, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but they actually went as far as to say that patients who exhibited things like trying to get more opiates, or, you know, scrounging for money, or going to places for different scripts, or typical addiction-like behaviors, the drug companies actually said, no, that's not really addiction. That's just pseudo addiction. And it actually means that they need more pain medicine. They would go out of their way to calm doctors' fears, if they even had any, that their patients would be
it'd be like going to
addicted.
Going to Dr. Now. You don't weigh enough.
Yeah.
I know you eat burgers, but
Yeah.
you should have more burgers to solve your burger problem.
It really is. It's like McDonald's sponsoring Dr. Now's office on 100 on my 1000. Yeah, they really went out of their way, because ultimately the people at the top of Insys will see this spelled out as obvious. You know, it smacks you in the face how obvious they were about it. They truly didn't care about the reduction in pain in end-stage cancer patients. They care about selling this drugs to as many people as possible, no matter the risk. And if you go back to the McKinsey episode, you'll see this type of behavior at Purdue Pharma. You know, these MBAs are not taking organic chemistry. They're not experts in addiction. They're experts in profit margins. They're experts in shareholder value maximization. And the interesting thing is, there were some sales reps, a lot of these sales reps, who said, God, like, I remember when my grandma was going through the end stage of her life, like, I really want to help people. So I'm going to go to oncologists. I'm going to go to hospitals that treat cancer, and I'm going to talk to doctors there. For example, one of them was Insys whistleblower Mia Guzman. She gave an interview on the podcast Fraud in America. When she went to oncologists to sell, she was told by her manager, like, hey, we don't go to oncologists because their patients die.
Right. No recurring revenue there.
So before we move to the next piece of corporate gossip, we should take a note that at this point, most startup pharma companies would have invested in a compliance team. But not Kapoor.
No.
He's running a lean, mean,
cost-effective machine.
Cost-effective pill milling machine. And sinking money into some nerd in a suit to alert Insys of potential legal risk was not in the budget. And let's remember, it's not like anybody in the C-suite at this point knew shit about science, despite how much time they spent in the lab doing photo shoots.
Yeah.
You know, they're focused on the bottom line. So once they get the stamp of approval from the FDA, it is off to the races. Is this your favorite piece of corporate gossip we're about to get into, Adam?
It's up there.
Corporate gossip number 3 is Insys sales team assemble. No uggos allowed. So in March 2012, 3 months after FDA approval, Insys has its full sales force to accompany HQ in Arizona for its sales kickoff, also known as an SKO. This is a pretty common. Yeah. These aren't like tenured salespeople who show up at this conference, right? Who've been hired by Insys. They're pretty green. They're fresh out of college. They have no sales experience. The starting salary
Fresh off the pole.
In some cases,
yes.
Starting salary was around 40 grand with additional bonuses and stock options. This is a picture of one of the places, the Westin Lake Las Vegas, where they would host some of these sales kickoffs. One interesting thing about the sales rep when they arrive in this picturesque location to do some business is whistleblower Mia Guzman and Tracy Crane, who are original representatives for Insys, would give a good description. They say, at the Scottsdale Hotel, Crane and Guzman talked in private about their new coworkers. They couldn't help noticing that the average sales rep was younger and even greener than they were. The job listing they had seen said that a bachelor's degree and 2 years of experience in sales were required. Evidently, those were loose guidelines. And there's this scene in the movie where Emily Blunt shows up for the interview and she's like, hey, like, I was a stripper, I worked at a restaurant, but like, I'm going to be honest, like, I don't really have much experience in sales. And the guy goes, looks her up and down and is like, don't worry about it. And he writes on her resume, PhD. And she's like, I don't have a PhD. And he goes, don't worry about it. Right. So he says, you're in, you're good to go. And I'll explain what PhD really means in a second. So these reps are overwhelmingly female, says the book. They're also remarkably attractive, and some of them flaunted it. The same was true for the men. There was a flirtatious atmosphere that made them a little wary. People in hot tubs with the higher-ups they had just met, rumors of heavy drinking and hookups. One female rep was spotted arm in arm with a senior executive in an upstairs hallway at the hotel at 3 a.m. It was the night before the conference even began. The gender dynamics of the company were noticeable. Insys used to be comprised of, a small group of executives who were mostly male. And suddenly, there's a lot of women around. For the most part, they had been selected by men who would supervise them closely. You can see where this is going. Their job would be to use their powers of persuasions with doctors who were also mostly male. Meeting up with Mike Babbage, he's been camped out in Kapoor's basement for the past 5 years trying to get this product to market. And all of a sudden, he's at the Westin in Scottsdale with all of his gorgeous new coworkers. He's surrounded by women his age, and he's the COO. So he's loving the attention. Here's a quote. The amount of personal space between Babbage and one female employee raised some eyebrows. She was not, in fact, a sales rep. She was the head of human resources. Imagine if you're having an issue with your manager because maybe, I don't know, he's sexually harassing you.
Right.
You go to the head of human resources who's boinking the COO. Later, Babbage had a, quote, one-day relationship with her, he said. At Insys, he became involved eventually with at least 5 women who worked under him. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, right.
If I'm being so generous, you could say that they hired these super green sales force because they were budget conscious. Mm-hmm. Right? If you worked for a different pharma company like AstraZeneca or Pfizer, you're making double the salary that you would be making at Insys. But internally, they would refer to the perfect sales rep of having a PhD, not a doctor in philosophy, but a person who is poor, hungry, and driven, or poor, hungry, and dumb, or poor, hungry, and desperate. Mm-hmm. And the leadership team spoke openly that the sales team should be, quote, easy on the eyes. Babbage was quoted by saying, no physician wanted a, quote unquote, unattractive person to walk through the door. Can you imagine a physician's like, oh my God, oh, you're so ugly.
You want to sell me what? Get out of here.
I can't even focus on the chemical makeup.
Oh my God, I've got a foot to go look at.
I think the Hippocratic Oath is like, first, do no harm.
Yeah.
Second, if they're not a 10, send them packing.
That's what they teach them. 10s only.
That is like the most common practice in all of pharmaceutical sales, though.
What?
Hot people first.
It's not uncommon, but to the degree that they did it was beyond the
I
pale.
bet you if you looked into most pharmaceutical sales companies, you're going to find it to be the hottest ones in the company are the ones selling.
I would argue that most salespeople in general are fairly good looking. I think that you have to have a level of confidence that's probably built throughout your life, and being good looking plays into that.
Yes.
I don't want to make like a
sweeping generalization.
but like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of salespeople I know are
we're not in sales.
You got a face for radio, they say.
We got a face for podcasting.
And judging by the YouTube videos, it's video views, it's no wonder.
Oh, here's a picture. This is from the 60 Minutes documentary. This is the executive leadership team. It looks like they're at some baseball game, but I mean, this looks like a vibe. Certainly, I would say everybody's pretty attractive. They look like they're down to clown.
They look like they've done sorority squats in their day.
Yes. I would say this group could also easily be the cast of Bachelor in Paradise. It definitely looked like a party crew, right? You're joining, and I'm sure for the most part, other than the fact that your work is directly contributing to one of our nation's most dangerous epidemics, it was probably a vibe. Mm-hmm. It certainly seemed like a vibe. So back to the retreat. There's one critical moment that happens at this Insys SKO in Arizona, much to the chagrin of the literal one adult in the room, Matt Napolitano, who's leading the marketing for Insys. So early in the week, Napolitano gives a fully compliant marketing lesson to the sales force about how Subsys was to be marketing, which is keeping it on label. John Kapoor found this pitch that he was giving boring, and he says, it puts us in a box. Okay, remember, that's a fairly heavily government regulated box that you are meant to be in to protect patients from your very dangerous drug. Kapoor tells the entire sales force that Subsys, a fentanyl-based cancer pain drug, can be just prescribed to anyone with pain. Pain is pain, he says. It doesn't matter if it's cancer pain, doesn't matter if it's stub toe pain, doesn't matter if it's from fibromyalgia or a broken back. Pain is pain.
It's funny because when he's originally quoted talking about his now deceased wife, he says, people just don't understand pain. They think pain is just pain.
And and it seems like just a medical mantra, but it's pretty damning. It basically ends up being the smoking gun, because what they're actually saying is it doesn't matter where the pain comes from. Like I said, terminal cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, you should be able to treat it with Subsys. And keep in mind, a lot of these people who were on Subsys for things that they shouldn't have been on could have gotten by with a Tylenol. So effectively, you're pushing salespeople to encourage doctors to prescribe this treatment off label. Kapoor even tells reps not to mention breakthrough cancer pain at all. Kapoor also wanted the word 5 minutes to come up. This is how quickly it starts to work. 5 minutes versus 30 minutes to come up early and often on sales calls.
He wanted them to bring an hourglass with them and flip it on the doctor's desk to show them how quickly it worked.
Yeah. And this is around the whole thing of like, no one should ever be in pain ever. Like, can you imagine somebody is in rheumatoid arthritis pain for 5 minutes? When Kapoor left the room, Napolitano was totally distraught. He came from like a totally stand-up pharmaceutical company that played by the rules, and he knows you can't just tell people to sell stuff off label. Kapoor was telling his lieutenants to ignore the FDA rules. The group was in a bind, and ultimately Kapoor was the boss. So Kapoor ultimately tells Napolitano to kick rocks, and he has Babbage take the stage and give the presentation. Remember, Babbage is a financial analyst. According to Napolitano, Babbage told the entire sales force, quote, Subsys is good for anybody, any pain point, any pain patient. There's an interesting power dynamic between Kapoor and Babbage, and we see this really play out. I don't know if Babbage feels like he owns something to Kapoor because he paid for his education. He made him COO of this company that he really had no business being in. I don't know how much dirt Kapoor had on Babbage at this point as well, like, you know, having been with him since his 20s. I'm not sure. Either way, Babbage does his duty and the sales meeting ends at a nightclub around 4 a.m. The sales force would leave Scottsdale with a massive hangover, some HR violations, and unbeknownst to most of them, possibly embark on their new careers as illegal drug peddlers. Are you ready for the next piece of corporate gossip?
Yeah.
Actually, you want to take a break first?
Yeah, let's take a break.
And then we'll get back to it. All right, and we're back. You ready for corporate gossip number 4?
Yeah, I am.
Corporate gossip number 4 is, wait, why are the guys in charge of regulating fentanyl on a yacht with the fentanyl manufacturer? Oh, I've heard this story before. So by the time Subsys hits the market, the FDA is already on the defensive. They know that this type of drug could be a disaster later on. So they're trying their best to put some guardrails in place, including an assessment that physicians are required to take. The assessment is followed by a signature that outlines improper use. So yes, I understand. So how could this possibly go wrong, right? The people in charge of administering this assessment were not government regulators, but corporations in the industry, most notably the fentanyl manufacturers themselves. In other words, the drug makers were supposed to police the prescribing drugs that they were promoting. Slams head on table. On top of that, once you sign up, once you say like, yes, I'm prescribing fentanyl and like, I understand the implications, you are put into this database. Insys and some of the other drug makers had access to this database, AKA they had an entire database of all of these doctors who had been prescribing some type of opioid. at real time because these doctors are updating this as they're starting to just prescribe the drug. The original purpose of having this was to protect patients, but it ended up being a gold mine for Insys. All of this patient information was anonymized, but the prescriber information was not. So they could very readily decide, here's a doctor in Palm Springs, California, we'll go out to him. He's already prescribing it. He's going to be what they'll ultimately call a whale, or a doctor who's prescribing very high amounts of opioids. Here's a quote from the book. The top executives were using a government mandated safety protocol as a marketing tool. They turned a shield into a sword. And at this point, they've got the data, but the numbers that they're seeing aren't pretty. Prescribers just aren't slinging the juice. So Kapoor decides to clean house. Here's a quote. Several reps were let go in other regions too. The herd was being aggressively culled. Kapoor was angry about the performance from some of the reps in the Northeast region, called their manager and said, why are they still here? Suddenly, coworkers were gone with no explanation from corporate. The high turnover had a psychological impact on the remaining reps. So you know at this point, like, oh shit. Think about this if you're a rep. I was just a server, or I was just a stripper, and now I am being paid $40,000 plus bonuses to work at this legitimate, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as most people know, pharmaceutical company. I can't risk going back to my server life. So what do I have to do? I'm poor, hungry, and driven. I have to go make sales. You can completely see an environment in which these salespeople have basically got their backs up against the wall. And Kapoor knew that. Here's a really interesting email that one of the sales reps that we'll meet shortly sent out to her team. And she says, team, I was informed today that each sales representative must generate at least one prescription per day. Note, it's not you must sell to one doctor a day. It's your doctor must prescribe substance to at least one person per day. How is that their job as sales reps? Like, this is where kind of like the cynicism of Insys is becoming very clear. Kapoor actually had good reason to be freaking out about people selling subsys because he had been sinking money into this company since the beginning and nobody had bought it. Remember, that's the idea. You sink a ton of money into this pharmaceutical company and then another company buys it, but nobody wanted to touch this drug because at that point they knew the risks. So he's in debt at this point. Some estimates say he's in debt at least $60 million. And so he's continuing to be incredibly like ruthless when it comes to his sales force. He cuts the bottom 10% of sellers every quarter and the pressure is on.
Yeah. How often are you seeing the founder of a pharmaceutical company be this ingrained in the sales, right? It never happens because Kapoor wanted to run a low cost model. And now he's like literally ingrained in every single decision in the pharmaceuticals. But
he's about to add somebody to his team. This guy is going to be very important to the story. It's my favorite part of the podcast where I get to thank all the people who supported us via Buy Me Coffee. If you don't want to commit to the Patreon and you still want to support the pod, you can do so by going to buymeacoffee.com/corporategossippod. And you get a shout out, which I'm going to do right now. If you don't hear your name, don't worry, we'll get to it this season. Rachel, hey from California, Mulan Moo, Paulina Sidwell, Trisha, Carl Schweiker, Tony from Canada, Mary Ostad, Ali Reza Rezavi, another friend of the pod, Polly, Daniel Good, Amy Peck, Chloe, somebody named Accountants Rock, Charlie L, Mike, Tay, Katie, Jen K, Katrina S, Katie D, Emily M, friend of the pod, Ann Walter, Chad, at Clara Husted. Thank you guys so much for your support. We really couldn't do this without you. This is a labor, but it's a labor of love, and your guys' support really makes it worth it. Every dollar that you guys send to the podcast goes right into the production. We pay for all of the subscriptions to do all of our research and book. There's a lot of people that actually work behind the scenes, and so we get to pay them, and it does put a dent in Mike's Topo Chico addiction. So thank you again from the bottom of our hearts. So corporate gossip number 5 is Kapoor needs somebody dirtier, somebody shittier, somebody with a dash of Tony Soprano, a sprinkle of Jordan Belfort. Meet Alec Burlikoff. So here's Alec Burlikoff from that 60 Minutes piece. So he's a 38-year-old sales whiz with more skeletons in his closet than a Koch brother. He comes from a sales family. His dad and brother were both car salesmen for the local Honda dealership. And up until the age 27, he's a counselor at a prep school in Boca Raton. One student's father came to him and said, you shouldn't be a guidance counselor. You should come be a sales rep at this company, Eli Lilly. He's a natural. He used what he learned working summers at the car dealership, and he's selling antipsychotics and Prozac. Berlikov rises to the top of the sales organization. He's a great schmoozer. He had a knack for chatting up doctors outside of the office, confiding in them things that anything that they cared to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. So here's a quote, a description of Berlikov. Berlikov had a knack for ingratiating himself with a doctor enough to get past the front desk, or better yet, get the target, I love the word target, out of the office for a more personal conversation. The money hours, he said, were the ones outside the 9-to-5 workday. Meet with a doctor, and then you could find some hot button, some desire or need that you could fulfill. He developed a close rapport with one prescriber in particular, an internist, and made tens of thousands of bonuses off of his scripts. Since the day I started working at Eli Lilly, I could do nothing wrong, he once said with brazenness. One of the things he does at Eli Lilly is he creates this scheme where Prozac is about to lose its exclusivity contract and move to a generic. And they have just come up with this new drug called Prozac Weekly, which I thought was like a periodical, but it's a Prozac that you take weekly. And a lot of these
Prozac Weekly. Yeah, we're getting into media.
It's just like adult coloring books. So Berlikov, a lot of these doctors are switching their patients over to the generic of Prozac. And what Berlikov does is basically somehow he gets the mailing addresses of all of the patients who are on Prozac and sends them directly a sample of Prozac Weekly and signs it by their doctor and says, hey, Adam, we're about to switch you over to a generic, but I thought you might want to try this, right? Ultimately, that story makes its way to the New York Times, and Berlikov, along with 8 others, are fired for the scheme. Berlikov would actually go on to sue Eli Lilly, saying that he had the blessing of management, which honestly I do not doubt at all, because he settled for $100,000.
Right.
So the reason I have no doubt about that management knew about this scheme is because Berlikov continued to get jobs in pharma. It's not like he was blacklisted. He worked at J&J and Insys' main competitor, Cephalon. So he interviews with Kapoor and Babich in 2012, right when Kapoor really needs to turn up the dial on these sellers. And Kapoor was in love. It kind of reminded me of the way that Jeff Skilling felt about Andy Fastow.
Right.
Like when these fucking scammy CEOs meet somebody who ends up being their protege, it's like the greatest love of all time. And he says to Babich, I think we found our new VP of sales. But first, he needs to prove himself. So corporate gossip number 6. Is this your favorite corporate gossip?
Yes.
Okay. So corporate gossip number 6 is, what's that? I can't hear your subsys pitch over the din of the strip club. Alec Berlikov has to prove himself to become the vice president of sales. And one of his first orders of business is to get an idea of who the whales are in the territory. Remember, he made his bones in Eli Lilly by targeting very high prescribing doctors for whatever medicine he was representing. And he wants to do the same thing with Subsys. So he finds... Did you guys see these, by the way, while you were both living in Orlando, these pain clinics?
Yeah, they were all the time.
That must have been after, when I was in Orlando, it was 2016. I think it was after my time. I didn't see a lot of it.
I never knew what they were. I was just like, okay.
Yeah, so what I'm showing on screen is like a very short, stout building that doesn't look like a doctor's office, but it says South Florida Pain Clinic. And in the window, it says walk-ins welcome, pain management, testosterone, weight loss, HGH. And what this is also called is a pill mill eventually. So they don't really exist anymore, but it was a place where people could go to get their opioid scripts filled. And it was fairly blatant. Berlikov takes this sales rep, Tracy Crane, and they go to seek out the whales that Crane has not been able to crack. One of them was Dr. Stephen Shun. Berlikov quickly finds the root cause of why Dr. Chun hadn't been prescribing Subsys. He had a quid pro quo relationship with another company. On top of
quid pro quo.
On top of the quid pro quo, Chun was dating a former sales rep from the company. So he was kind of already in with the competition. And so Burlakoff knew this was going to be an issue that he's going to come across time and time again. He's like, shit, these prescribers already have relationships with our competition. So why would they switch to us? So he hatches a brilliant plan. We'll pay him off. But we can't just slip a sock full of Sacagaweas in the mailbox. First, we got to set up a good old-fashioned money laundering scheme. And that's when the Insys speaker program is born. This is how the book Pain Hustlers describes what a speaker program is, or at least what it was marketed as. A speaker program is a widely used promotional tool in the pharmaceutical industry. Drug companies pay doctors to give talks about the benefits of their product. The sales rep assigned to the doctors helps set up the event and attends. Usually there's small gatherings with 4 to 12 attendees in addition to the speaker and the sales rep. The talks takes place in a clinic or at a dinner in a private room in a restaurant. The speaker is trained in advance and uses a slide deck created by the drug company to make these presentations. The doctor signs a contract and joins the drug maker's speakers bureau. So you can see, like, in being incredibly generous, this is a way for other doctors to network with one another and learn about drugs that they hadn't learned about before.
And get a free dinner too.
But what this ends up being, in Insys's case, is a massive kickback scheme. This type of scheme is obviously one that would make regulators really suspicious. The industry would say, look, this is just peer-to-peer marketing and education. These doctors can better influence other doctors than like Whittle pharmaceutical sales rep. And you trust doctors, don't you? And that may have been what Insys and Burlakoff said publicly, but privately, they knew what they were doing. There's a conversation that happens in the book between Crane and Burlakoff. Burlakoff says the real target of the speaker program was not the audience of the talks, but the speaker himself. The presentation really didn't matter at all. The idea was to funnel cash to the speaker so that he would participate. He would prescribe subsys in return. If he didn't live up to his end of the deal, he wouldn't get paid to speak anymore. Quid pro quo. He boiled it right down, Crane recalled. We pay doctors to write scripts. That's what the speaker program is. Interestingly, what's really fucked up is they apply kind of like the PhD doctrine to these doctors as well. They talk about Insys targeting these doctors, specifically if the doctor was divorced or needed money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, alimony's not cheap. Neither is child support.
So Crane asks Burlakoff in the car, she's like, is this legal, buddy? It sounds a lot like bribery. And he allegedly had no retort. He was kind of shrugged. And keep in mind, Insys hired these super green salespeople. Like maybe they hadn't graduated from college. They hadn't worked at a sales company before, let alone a pharmaceutical company. So one of the reasons I think that they did that is because these salespeople had no idea what was normal and what wasn't normal. Like the one guy who did know that this was unusual was fired. That was Napolitano. And so even if these salespeople did feel weird about it, they didn't know that they could whistleblow. And even if they did whistleblow, they didn't have the support net to help them when they were inevitably fired from the only secure job that they had. So Napolitano could leave because he had some legitimate sales experience and could find another job, but a lot of these people couldn't. So that's what makes me think to these sales reps, I believe this fraud is just like any other. It's like a series of small decisions or red flags that you don't notice or explain away until you're already on the business end of a federal investigation. But for Kapoor's part of this, it's so well designed and premeditated. It's actually fucking insane. So they get to work setting up these speakers events. Doctors are paid up to $2,500 to speak along with a free meal and drink. So here's an Instagram that one of the doctors, this is one of the doctors at his speakers conference with two quite busty sales reps flanking his left and right. He looks just tickled to be there, doesn't he?
He looks like Joe Giudice,
he does.
doesn't he?
What these speakers turned into was effectively, listen, you go out to the bar with your friends, run up a bar tab, pretend that you attended some speaker events. Our sales rep are going to, forge the names of doctors and other prescribers who attended this meeting. But in fact, you're just going out, getting drunk with your friends, and we're going to send you a $2,500 check. The crazy thing here is that, remember when I told you that there would be certain documents that the secretaries would regularly eat? Here's one of those documents. It's a spreadsheet that shows how much money they paid for the doctor for their bribe compared to how much they were prescribing. And they wanted at least a 2 times ROI. So if I give you a kickback of $2,500, you better prescribe $5,000 worth of Subsys to your patients. And you had to keep that up or the payments would stop rolling in. I mean, it was so fucking blatant. This was one, I suppose, that wasn't consumed.
That wasn't eaten?
Yeah.
This was not salted
This
enough.
one
It was
must-
sent back to the kitchen.
This one must have had a little bit of mud pie on it. So they had this whole internal advertising campaign. They wanted these doctors to prescribe more and more Subsys with a technique called titration, which is basically increasing the amount of dosage that you're prescribing to like the maximum amount before this person fucking passes out. And so here's a rap video that Insys created with some of their sales reps explaining how sales reps should be pushing titration to their doctors. Have you seen this?
No, I
haven't?
read about it though.
Build relationships that are healthy. Got more docs than Janelle's got selfies. Always compliant, like we supposed to be. Ain't trying to get that call from Yoshi. What we built here can't be debated. Shout out to Kapoor for what you created. While the competition just making noise, we're making history cause we're great by choice. I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. I got new patients and I got a lot of them. I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. I got new patients and I got a lot of them. I love titrations, yeah, that's not a problem. And I got new patients and I got a lot of them. If you wanna be great, listen to my voice. You can be great, but it's your choice.
I think the most offensive part about that video is that it's 5 minutes long.
Yeah, that is too
like
long.
we see
it
a
looks
lot of
professionally edited too.
it does. We see a lot of shitty corporate videos on this podcast. I think that might be the worst one.
Well, they wanted to make it as long as it took for the fentanyl to kick
Yeah,
in.
Yeah,
seriously.
5 minutes. Yeah.
By the end of this video,
Put
you're
me
gonna
on
love
pain.
it.
Oh my god. So we've got these doctors pushing the max amount of Subsys because they're being bribed and because they're watching these videos and being completely hypnotized by the two hotties rapping. But what if they were to prescribe Subsys, but the patient's insurance wouldn't cover it? No matter, not a problem for Insys. Insys sets up a department in charge with tricking insurance companies through misdirection and misleading tactics to get them to pick up the tab. This is a government press release that describes the scheme. Employees of Insys posed as employees of the practitioner, so posed as people from the doctor's office, and used a script of false and misleading representations about the patient diagnosis in order to secure approval for the drug by the insurance provider. For example, since insurers were much more likely to authorize payment for Subsys if a patient was being treated for cancer-related pain, Insys employees were instructed to mislead insurers regarding the true diagnosis of the patient. Kapoor approved these tactics and demanded 100% success rates. Like, some of these patients were prescribed Subsys and they would get a hold of their medical records where the insurance company was told they had cancer and they were like, I never had cancer.
Do you know what Subsys was good for though? Like an actual use of Subsys
What?
that was not breakthrough cancer pain?
What?
Small esophaguses. Yeah. I like could not stop thinking about it. I was
Wow.
like, wait, Son's got a small esophagus?
She could have
She
used,
could have used
some-
Subsys.
Yeah, we're referencing.
Why?
I guess
don't know why,
it
but
opens it up?
that's in. So the IRC was the team that was responsible for getting these pre-approvals done, and that was like in their playbook for they would not mention cancer. They'd be very
disinclined.
to mention cancer, but one of the things that would be approved, they noticed by insurers, was, oh, well, she has trouble swallowing.
She has a
or
small esophagus.
Small esophagus.
That's so. See, I tell you people all the time that the crossover between between Real Housewives and corporate gossip is strong. These worlds collide constantly. With the doctors greased and the insurance reps confused, Burlikoff and Kapoor were ready to accost the public with fentanyl spray like they were perfume salespeople at Macy's. And where else to celebrate than corporate gossip's favorite strip club? Say it with me, gents.
Rachel's.
Off of 575 in Orlando, Florida.
And if somebody from Rachel's would like to sponsor the show, I'd be open to it. Rebecca, would you be okay
I've
with that?
never been there. I have to go, I guess.
We'd have to have a steak dinner.
Sunday brunch.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
We should go for
Is
a
it
steak
good
dinner.
food?
Ted's
It's actually
Montana
not
Grill
bad.
and then there.
Okay.
Yeah, they actually have great steaks. I've never...
Shout out to Cheetahs in Atlanta. Great fried chicken.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about strip club food.
Yeah, we should just
do a
be-
whole episode
Oh
on
my
it.
God, we should.
We should just be sponsored by strip clubs. I mean, we love their work.
Yeah.
And they're a big hangout of a lot of our targets.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boots on the ground.
Bees on the G's.
Rachel's.
Boots in the air.
Okay.
Heels in the air. All right, we're having fun.
So it was during a trip to Florida's best gentleman's club. Would you guys agree?
No.
Yeah. I mean, best food.
Miami's got better strip clubs.
Rachel's. And this is in Orlando.
Yeah.
So can you explain to us how Brylikoff meets Sunrise Lee?
Yeah. Let me set the scene. So it was in Florida's best strip club, as you mentioned, Rachel's. Burlikoff set his eyes on Sunrise Lee, and Sunrise Lee was a stripper at the West Palm location, which is my Miami Greater area, which Burlikoff frequented all the time with doctors and on sales meetings. You know, typical. It's like, you know, making a booking a room for a meeting in your office,
Right.
except you go straight to Rachel's. You know, at this point, Burlikoff was also habitually using cocaine, as one does in sales. So excuse his decision making. Burlikoff talks with Lee in what I imagine was the champagne room. He has a realization. This stripper can sell anything.
Yeah, I bet you he was like, you should come work for me. It'll be amazing. We'll make you a millionaire.
And then put the fentanyl in and was like, I'm calmed down.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a great pitch for you.
So this is a still from the movie Pain Hustlers. The character that's supposed to be Burlikoff is played by Chris Evans, who meets Emily Blunt's character at the strip club. I think it's a kind of a combination Sunrise Lee, Tracy Crane.
They could have done a little bit more DE&I with the actresses.
Yeah.
Another miss by Sarandos.
So during a brief relationship with Burlikoff, which they don't touch on in the movie, but I'm not sure what this relationship actually looked like between Burlikoff and Sunrise Lee. But she's coached to become not a sales rep, but a sales manager at Insys. Remember, she has no sales experience, no pharmaceutical experience.
And can't write an email to save her life.
And she's about to be the manager for a bunch of other sellers.
If you remember the email that Rebecca was talking about, this is the same one.
Yeah. She's completely out of her depth. Okay. But she's a single mother of 2 boys who's in dire straits. Her upbringing, side note, was awful. She was basically kidnapped by her father on a scheduled visit. Her face was on a milk carton at one point, and she finds her way back to her birth mother at 8 years old, only to emancipate herself at 16. This would certainly be the poor, hungry, and driven sales rep that they're looking for. And honestly, like, I don't know. I find Sunrise Lee to be a very conflicting character because I can understand why she did a lot of what she did. And I feel in many ways she was taken advantage of, and it's kind of shitty. So Lee would go on to manage a region in the Midwest, which, like most of the country at the time, was full of pill mills, like we just saw in Florida. So Lee did whatever it took to get a sale, and she didn't care if these doctors were coming out of these shady clinics. She was there to perform. She basically approached some of these doctors, and effectively the way that she would court these pill mill doctors is taking them out on a night out on the town. So in one specific case, this is around Chicago, Lee and 2 female reps took this pill mill doctor to a racy nightclub called the Underground Chicago, which was frequently visited by celebrities. They sat in the VIP order. They got bottle service. At one point, 2 reps turned towards the pill mill doctor and saw something extraordinary. They said that Lee was sitting on the pill mill doctor's lap facing him. One of the people there described heavy groping. His hands were all over her front and her pants and her shirt, and they were heavily kissing. Lee denies that this happened. But allegedly, Kapoor knew all about this. Remember, the HR director is boinking the COO, so there's nobody there that's going to...
Keep it up.
Yeah, he says, keep it up. She's doing a good job.
Great job. Numbers don't lie.
Yeah. Ready for corporate gossip number 7?
Yes.
This is the part of the movie where there's a montage, and Kapoor and Burlikoff are hanging out the roof of a limousine in the Vegas Strip. They're tossing $100 bills to any passing doctor. And all of a sudden it comes to an abrupt end. So Insys actually goes public in 2014. There's not a ton of footage. This is a screen grab from like a recording from YouTube that I found. And for a brief period of time after Insys goes public in 2014, everything's coming up Kapoor. The Insys stock is at $15 a share. Kapoor is ranked number 335 on the Forbes for 100 list. Here he is on the cover of the magazine. Again, a year after Elizabeth Holmes was on the cover of the same fucking magazine. But behind the scenes, the Department of Justice is making their case using our favorite legal tool, RICO. It's the Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act. And it was a federal law that was like passed in the early 70s designed to target the mafia. And basically, it allows the government to target not only specific individuals committing crimes, but also the organization they belong to. This is an example. I think this is early, example of using RICO. This is the Genovese crime family.
Hey, Genovese.
So that's what it's classically used for. But more recently, it's been used to prosecute corporate crime. Prosecuting corporate crime under RICO involves proving that the corporation effectively operated as a criminal enterprise, where individuals within the organization are engaging in a pattern of illegal behavior that directly affects the company's operations. So recently, you might have heard of RICO being used to target Donald Trump, Shein, the MLB, FIFA, the Catholic Church. In the case of Insys, the DOJ brought together lots of different violations perpetrated by those at the bottom, and then kind of moved their way up to the top. So, for example, that pill mill doctor who went to the strip club with Sunrise Lee and got a lap dance, he ended up going on to be arrested. He prescribed 58% of the substance in the entire state of Illinois.
Big state.
But they would work their way up to John Kapoor. So they'd start with the reps, they'd start with the doctors, and work their way to the top of the organization. They alleged that Insys operated a conspiracy to distribute the drugs by bribing doctors and misleading insurers. Interestingly, the prosecutor who led the case also led the case against Whitey Bulger.
Yeah, that was great. I like that piece of it. Yeah, he and he interviewed Burlikoff at one point and was like, this guy is like the worst. He was like, I've interviewed Whitey Bulger, Kevin Weeks, all of Winter Hill Gang, and this guy tops them all. He's just a trash bag in the wind.
Here's a great quote from the prosecutor. He says, the mob at least has a code of conduct. They only do bodily harm to other bad guys. These guys do not care. And this is the most insane thing to me, the most insane quote. And this also happens in the movie. As the prosecutors are moving in on Insys, Kapoor tries to make Babich, the guy who had become kind of like a son to him, he tries to make him take the fall. Babich stated during the trial that he said every company goes through its struggles and then things like this happen. There's always a fall guy and you're going to be the fall guy. How fucked up is that?
Seriously.
This man lived in your house.
They broke bread.
Yeah. Ultimately, Burlikoff flipped and testified against the boss. And boy, did he flip. He is everywhere. You Google opioid Insys, he's going to be the first face that you see. Babich, on the other hand, is much more quiet. But the trial lasts 10 weeks and the jury deliberated for 15 days, which is insane, by the way. The fact that they deliberated for over 2 weeks shows how complicated these RICO cases are, and also good on the jury for staying that long. I'm sure they were exhausted. All right, you ready for going to the aftermath?
Yes,
Corporate gossip number 8.
Aftermath.
As a result of these charges, Insys goes bankrupt. John Kapoor is sentenced to, curious what the audience thinks he's going to be sentenced to. I'll give you a chance to give your guess. And I'll tell you the answer. 5.5 years in prison. That does not seem like nearly enough. Keep in mind, the max sentence for a RICO charge is 20 years. Insys agreed to pay $225 million to settle the federal government's criminal and civil investigations into the company's marketing practices. And as part of the settlement, Insys Therapeutics admitted to bribing doctors to prescribe the painkiller. Kapoor, got this, is even worse, was released from prison to home confinement at his Arizona mountaintop estate in this June after serving 2 years. Michael Babich.
Well, that's fair.
Michael Babich pleaded guilty in federal court to conspiracy and mail charges. He did cooperate with prosecutors. He faced up to 25 years in prison, but received 30 months. Sunrise Lee was sentenced to a year and a day in prison. In her sentencing memo, she accused Insys of taking advantage of her and the physicians. Insys was hiring female exotic dancers to target lonely, overworked, that's a quote, physicians in a sales scheme her attorneys called a pharmaceutical dystopia. Alex Burlikoff got only 26 months in prison. At the sentencing hearing, the assistant U.S. attorney asked the judge to hold your nose and reward Burlikoff, who came to investigators long before the trial and revealed the inner workings of the scheme.
That was all a lie. When he initially went into prosecutors, he basically wrote himself as, I'm the good guy here,
really?
You guys. This is what's going on, and it came out to be all a lie. So it's funny that his defense attorney would say that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That wasn't the defense attorney. That was the prosecutor who said that, to hold your nose. But I didn't realize that he tried to paint himself as the good guy first.
Yeah.
So others that were charged include Richard Simon, the national sales director at Insys, who was sentenced to 33 months. Joseph Rowan, the former regional sales director at Insys, who was sentenced to 27 months. Michael Gurry, the former vice president of managed markets, was sentenced to 33 months in prison. And for what it's worth, the government did ask for much higher sentences. Here are two of the doctors. Stephen Chun was sentenced, I don't remember for how much. That was the whale that they were sitting in front of. Remember when Burlikoff and
smoking gun doctor.
Yeah. Well, no, he was the one that when they initially started the speakers program, it was targeted to Dr. Stephen Chun. He's in jail. Here's another one, Gordon Friedman, a Manhattan physician. He was sentenced to 17 years. And I mean, there's countless of other physicians that were sentenced. But let's dive into the monetary settlements, because Insys is just one of the many players in the opioid crisis that have agreed to settlements, including McKinsey. They had a $78 million settlement in claims over it helped fuel the Insys opioid crisis. This is after another $600 million settlement to several U.S. states and another $230 million to various local governments. But it's not clear to me how effective all these settlements are. Between McKinsey and Insys and Purdue, you're easily in the billions in terms of settlements. But I have this study, and I'll link it in the show notes, from KFF News, which is a health policy institute. Basically, it's incredibly difficult to track and make sure that this money is being applied where it needs to be, which is to the people who have been addicted or the families impacted by the death of their loved ones who are addicted. The amount of the funds themselves are a moving target, because a lot of these companies are in and out of bankruptcy court. In some cases, the settlement is paused because the bankruptcies have been appealed to the Supreme Court. On top of that, some states aren't reporting how the money is used. Mm-hmm. When the money is reported on, it goes to treatment, overdose prevention, and controversially on law enforcement. Like, it's possible that a lot in these cities that you're seeing, like super nice police cars, Mustangs and whatever, that could be opioid settlement money.
Right.
Several governments use settlement dollars to, here we go. I have it right here. Several governments use settlement dollars to purchase patrol cars, technology to help officers hack into phones, and body scanners. Supporters say these tools are critical to crack down on drug trafficking, but research suggests, obviously, law enforcement does not prevent overdoses. And some states haven't even spent the money yet. So it's a total mess. All right. Are you ready for the takeaways?
Yeah.
So I honestly think that for the majority of these sales reps, I don't think they went into it thinking that they would be drug pushers. Do you?
No, I think they were in desperate situations. Most of them, or some of them, just wanted a job.
Yeah. I think that they were going into it maybe even wanting to make a difference in the lives of these end-stage cancer patients. And I feel like, as great as it is that these, like you wrote, it's great to see some of these CEOs actually face jail time, but it doesn't make up for the massive oversight on the part of the regulatory bodies that are supposed to protect the public. Like, this should have never happened. There were incidents when investigators presented evidence to the FDA to investigate in similar cases, and the FDA declined to prosecute because, according to the one investigator, the FDA was afraid of pharmaceutical companies.
There was actually an initial sales rep whistleblower for Insys who filed a case and then dropped it because it was just taking too long, and the And the government didn't think it was worth its time. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze. They were looking for headlines.
It's crazy. And it's just like, why is a regulator afraid of the company they regulate?
Did you know something about whistleblowers? That if you whistleblow, whatever money is recouped in the efforts of the whistleblowing, you actually have a right to.
Yeah.
So you could earn money on the whistleblowing.
I actually want to talk about that because the whistleblower, I think who you're talking about was a woman who...
No, there was another one. His name was Kevin Furcus.
Oh, okay. I was talking about Maria Guzman. She was actually named Whistleblower of the Year by Taxpayers Against Fraud, which is a nonprofit organization. I do think it's interesting when you look at the profile of some of these whistleblowers. They're often women, or they're often people who don't, like people of color or people who are the minority, because they're not... They don't feel included in the group. And so they're actually more likely to whistleblow. So that's just like another reason why we should have more diversity in these C-suites, and another reason why it will never happen, because they know these stats. I get really nervous about the whistleblower protection laws in this country. It's frustrating too, because the regulators and the people we need to pass these laws are also the ones who benefit if we don't pass whistleblower protection laws. And the thing that frustrates me, I guess where I'll leave it, is if you've listened to this podcast, at this point, you may believe that white collar criminals are sometimes, in this case, I would say if you're looking at pure number of lives lost, more dangerous than violent criminals. I would say Insys and PG&E, just again, in terms of pure casualty, are far more dangerous than any mobster, than any violent criminal, than any serial killer. Am I crazy for saying that?
No.
Yeah, but people can't make money off of that.
That's what I'm saying. So I think it's really reflective on our country that many of these guys get effectively a slap on the wrist, and Kapoor is chilling in his Arizona estate for another 2 years, and then he'll be off scot-free. It's depressing. So anyway, do you have anything more you want to talk about before we wrap here?
No, I'm just trying to get the name of the other whistleblower, but I can't find him. So
we'll
I'm sorry
put it in the show notes.
If you killed a person, stole their wallet, got caught, they take the wallet back. They don't let you keep. They don't take like 20 of the $100 that you
there are
stole.
civil penalties. I mean,
yeah, but he's still going to be rich. He's living in a giant mansion.
Wait, I can find the whistleblower. It's in here.
He should be stripped of everything he owns and put in a studio apartment. If they're going to not put him in jail, they got to make him completely useless.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if, perhaps the place that he's staying is a friend's house. I mean, you can't make him not stay in a friend's house. Like, I don't know. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no doubt that there's a double standard, even when you're talking about the consequences being the same.
Ray Furchak.
That's
Ray
the
Furchak
other...
was the first whistleblower and had to withdraw because he was paying for his own attorney to look in that whistleblowing case, so he dropped it because it was costing him too much money, and the government didn't seem they were gonna look like they were gonna take the case.
Yeah. Well, good for you, Ray and Maria. We applaud you. Whistleblowers are our heroes here on the Corporate Gossip Podcast. And we'll wrap it there. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so by clicking the link in our bio to buy us a coffee. That goes to all the books that we read, except for this one, which, like I said, was furnished by the publisher. And it goes to all of our newspaper subscriptions and all that good stuff. So you can support us there. You can follow us on TikTok at Corporate Gossip Pod, or on Instagram at Corporate Gossip Pod. By the way, I have no backup accounts, but I have been being recently, what's the word?
Replicated.
My identity has been somewhat stolen on the internet, and some people are kind of like creating accounts that are pretending to be me. It's not me. Okay, so there's only one account. It's Corporate Gossip Pod, and you can email us at becca@nighttoast.com or adam@nighttoast.com. Anything else that I'm supposed to? Oh, if you like this podcast, make sure to write and review. It's like the number one way that we get out there, and that more people find our podcast. Anything else?
Nope.
Thank you for being here, Mike. Thanks again. Okay, bye. See you next week.